Hello, I'm John Faine. I'm here in the offices of Gordon Legal with two of the partners who have looked after the Robodebt class action. Peter Gordon from Gordon Legal and James Norton. Good morning to you both.
Good morning, John.
Explain to us how this case started, Peter. What's it about? Why are we here?
It's a claim for people who have had money taken off them by the Commonwealth Government who previously received a range of Centrelink benefits. And they had the money taken off them because the Commonwealth Government used an income averaging scheme using data that they collected from the tax office. It was a yearly averaging of data from the tax office, but applied to people who, in the overwhelming majority of cases, received benefits for a period within that 12 months. So the averaging was not accurate.
But how many people, James, are we talking about, and how much money are we talking about, just to give it some dimension?
Well, it's a huge number of people, so it's somewhere over 600,000 people received debt notices under the Robodebt scheme. In addition, it's probably over $1 billion of money that has been unlawfully taken by the Commonwealth with respect to those Robodebts.
Okay, that's a staggering amount of money and a staggering number of people. Just before we get into the detail of it all though, how did it get this far? Because this all started how many years ago?
It started in 2015 with a pilot project. Actually, it started before that. What used to happen is that Centrelink would use income averaging to try to identify people who may have been overpaid.
So effectively what the government did was it said, you're guilty until you can prove you're innocent. In other words, you owe this debt unless you can prove to us that you don't. And how many of us have still got records going back, 3, 4, 5, 6 years?
That's right, going back to debts as early as 2010, 2011. Yeah. So many people didn't have the paperwork. Many people couldn't get the paperwork.
Yeah,
they might have
the people you worked for don't exist anymore. The business has gone broke, or they've done a runner, or whatever it might be.
One of the key things that went wrong in this, and that the Commonwealth did wrong, you've just identified there, and it bears emphasis. The Commonwealth asserting a debt, it actually bears the onus of proof. It took a whole series of steps to persuade individual people by these sort of notices that they had to prove that they didn't owe money.
I can't just allege that you, Peter Gordon, I reckon you owe me money and I'm not going to prove it. You have to prove you don't owe it to me. That can't work.
But that's exactly what the federal government did.
To hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, and not just anybody, but some of the most vulnerable people in the community.
We say falsely and really dishonestly created the impression by a whole series of actions, including the notices and their communications, falsely created the impression that you have to prove to us that you didn't owe this money. The onus was always the Commonwealth's in exactly the way that you described.
So why a class action succeeding? There's all these other things that people are supposed to have appeal rights that Peter just referred to. There's supposed to be oversight by the Parliament, the media, the Ombudsman. I mean, things aren't supposed to get this wrong. How did it get to this point where it finally took this extraordinary class action to bring these people to account?
I think they did a cost-benefit analysis, frankly. I think that they added up that if they have to refund 20, 50 cases a year that go to the AAT, that might be $1-2 million at most with legal fees. But they were making hundreds of millions of dollars from the people who weren't in a position to exercise their rights.
Which is 99% of the people.
And that's the real effectiveness of a class action. Yep. No one should believe that if it weren't for the availability of a class action and the fact that we brought it, they would be doing anything other than picking off the odd claim as it came up month after month in the AAT and giving some kind of justice to a very small percentage of people. This has delivered a massive result to hundreds of thousands of people. It'll continue to do so.
So James, take us through. You've got 650,000 people. Where are we up to now with the government's, I might say, somewhat surprising announcement late on Friday afternoon last week?
Well, the government admitted on Friday that they were going to refund money to people who they have assessed are victims of Robodebt. And the government has also announced that they received advice that the Robodebt scheme was unlawful, that the use of ATO averaging in whole or in part was unlawful.
Now, that's what you've been asserting, and others, including legal aid agencies that Peter referred to, have been asserting right from the get-go.
That's right.
Why has it taken them so long to see what everyone else could see?
It's a very good question, probably a question for them. But I think the interesting thing about that is that refunding the money isn't enough. It's not going to make people whole again in terms of the damage that this system has caused. Right. So our claim, obviously, we've asked for the money to be paid back, but also damages with respect to the distress and the inconvenience, the real harm that this system has caused.
By damages, you mean compensation?
Compensation.
To each one of 650, thereabouts, 1,000 people?
That's right.
How do you measure how much they might be worth?
Well, it's a good question, and it's something that will need to be worked out either between us and the Commonwealth or by the court eventually. And I think one of the things that really struck us is when we announced the class action investigation, thousands of people started calling this firm, telling us their stories about their experience. And given so many people who are involved, it's a real mix of experiences, but some of the stories are horrible. People have been really detrimentally affected by this system.
Some people have taken their own lives.
That is the case. Also, people...
Not entirely because of Robodebt, it needs to be said, but it was the last straw syndrome. It was
well, certainly the family members of those people attribute in a major way those deaths to the Robodebt system. You also have people who had to make very difficult choices about paying back a debt or paying their mortgage or paying their bills, keeping the power on, those sorts of financial choices that have really impacted people.
So how do you go about, I mean, you can't individually assess the aggravation and anxiety and distress of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, can you, Peter?
Well, in effect, that's what the law should do, and that's what people should. As you say, not everyone's been affected in the same way, but where you have been profoundly affected, where you've had mental health issues which have caused you to think about or even make an attempt on your own life, where you've had relationship breakdown, where you've had career breakdown, where you've been estranged from your family because they falsely and wrongly formed the view that you're a welfare cheat. The circumstances that are profound and the damages entitlements which flow from it are also profound.
In effect, your class action's turning into a quasi-royal commission, Peter.
Yeah, well, look, the class action shouldn't be seen as a royal commission, and it shouldn't be seen as the be-all and end-all of the response to the Robodebt scandal. What's happened has happened, and I think we should acknowledge that this agreement to refund $720 million is at least an acknowledgement. It's an acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and it's a first step to compensation.
But it's an attempt for them to get out of it cheaply too, isn't it?
Sure, but a responsible and, dare I say, compassionate government, faced with the consequences of what it's done, now needs to address all of these issues that you've described. It needs to address the refund, but I'm sure that the people who run the federal government now, as business people, would understand you don't steal $720 million of other people's money, hold it for 4 years, and not be accountable for the interest. So they need to deal with that. They need to deal with the losses that have accrued to people because they didn't have that money. That's just common sense. That's what any compassionate government would do.
When do I get some money is what everyone's going to be asking.
The important thing to note is that the class action is still continuing, that the announcement made by the Commonwealth appears to only relate to a set of the people who have been affected by Robodebt.
When might I get some money back, and do I have to wait till all these other things get resolved, including arguments about punitive damages, before I get my money back?
It's entirely possible that we will approach the court and say we want an immediate order that the $720 million that they've talked about be refunded to people from whom it's been wrongfully taken right now. And then several months down the track, we'd like to try the negligence claim with respect to all of the other monies that you owe. That's an available option that we'll be raising both with the government and with the court in the next few weeks.
James, explain to me, how do I know whether I'm covered by this? How do I know if I'm part of the class?
Well, if you've received a letter from Centrelink recently in the last week regarding the class action, it's called an opt-out notice. If you've received that letter, then you're a group member. Centrelink considers you a group member for the litigation. And if you want to stay a group member, which means that you're part of the class action and you get the benefit of any orders that are made by the court ultimately, then you don't have to do anything. You're automatically in and you can stay in.
One of the claims you've made, Peter, is for negligence. So what you're saying is the government should be held to account on a whole lot of levels. And one of them is they made an administrative error, another is that they were proceeding without any sort of legal foundation. You've also said they're negligent. Now, negligence is usually like, if you have a car crash or something. How's it negligent for the government in this instance to have run this scheme?
We say they did two things which were negligent. One is to introduce an averaging system, which was so inaccurate and so wildly off the mark in terms of identifying who may have a debt and who may not, and asserting that to people in a vulnerable position in itself was negligent, and in my view, it was reckless. In addition to that theory, we also say that creating a communications regime which made people believe that they had to comply, that they bore the onus of proof, that they had to comply within a particular time, that there's all this pressure on them that they were in the wrong, doing the wrong thing and had to atone or pay the money back, was a communications system and regime which in itself was as a whole misleading and deceptive in a way that was negligent. This sort of method of communication is a way for us to get out, hopefully to the hundreds of thousands of people who are affected by this, some information about it. And what we'd like to do over the next few weeks is actually put more podcasts out, and we invite people to ask us their questions, send them in by email or phone them in, and to the extent that we get questions which are helpful and relevant, we'll use this method again. So if you've got questions about what's going on with the court case, with the opt-out process, with what Robodebt means, even what the government just said, send them into Gordon Legal, make contact with us, and we'll get it out on the next podcast or the podcast after that, and hopefully give people some information that can make them feel more comfortable.
One other issue that's important here is that the Attorney-General, Christian Porter, who's been sent to clean up this mess, he said on television the other day he didn't want to apologise because it was a legal complication. While there's mediation and the court proceedings are on foot, it would go against them. So is there solid legal foundation for his reluctance to apologise?
I wanted to say something about this because he actually said that the government wasn't in a position to apologise because of the litigation. We actually think it's really important to the people that we act for, the people whose stories we've held, and that everyone's seen, that there be an apology. We're prepared, as the lawyers acting for the applicants and the group members in the class action, to make this undertaking to the court and to the federal government. If you will give a proper and genuine apology, we won't use the fact of that apology in court. It won't have any negative effect. It won't affect the litigation in any way. We won't seek to rely upon it. I make that undertaking on behalf of the applicants and the group members because we actually believe it's really, really important to the people who've suffered so much through this to hear the government say, not just that it's taking some step because it's being forced by the imminent trial date in the class action to make some financial measure, but that it's actually sorry, that it's actually contrite, that it recognises that it's done the wrong thing and wants to atone. So I hope that there'll be a positive response to that offer.
As an example of the law being sometimes a blunt instrument, but in this case an effective one to hold power to account when everything else didn't succeed, congratulations to you. And if there are people who are wondering exactly where you stand, Gordon Legal would be very happy to receive your questions, your inquiries, and hopefully sometime down the track we'll be able to give you more information as events continue to unfold in this remarkable class action over Robodebt.